How I reclaimed my property and my peace after my stepmother turned my home into her son's personal dumping ground. Posted to r/relationship_advice. I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but after 18 months of absolute chaos, property damage, police involvement, and a family reckoning that was long overdue, I need to get this off my chest and maybe help someone else who finds themselves in a similar situation. This is going to be incredibly long, but I promise the payoff is worth it. Grab some coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the worst 18 months of my life, and how I finally took it all back. For context, I'm a 32-year-old veterinary technician. I've worked at the same animal hospital for 9 years now, slowly building my career and my savings account one paycheck at a time. I started as a kennel assistant making minimum wage, worked my way through certification, and now I'm the lead surgical tech. It's demanding work, 12-hour shifts, emergency calls, heartbreaking cases, but I love it. Animals have always been my refuge, ever since I was a little girl. 2 years ago, I finally achieved what felt like an impossible dream for someone from my background. I purchased a mobile home on 2 acres of land about 40 minutes outside the city. It's not a mansion, it's a 2019 double-wide with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, but it's mine. Every single payment came from my own pocket. No help from anyone, no inheritance, no lottery win. Just years of saving, sacrificing, and careful financial planning. I've spent countless weekends since then improving the property. I planted a vegetable garden that now produces tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs. I built a small chicken coop with my own hands, watched YouTube videos until I understood the basics, then figured out the rest through trial and error. I have 6 hens now, and collecting fresh eggs every morning feels like a small miracle. I painted the deck, landscaped the front yard, and created a little fire pit area where I can sit on cool evenings and watch the stars. This place represents everything I've worked for. It's my sanctuary. Now for the family background, because it's essential to understanding what happened next. My mother passed away when I was 14. Breast cancer that was caught too late, spread too fast, and took her from us in 18 brutal months. I was old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to be terrified, old enough to remember every detail of her decline. My father fell apart after she died. He's not a bad man, I want to be clear about that, but he lost something when Mom died. Some essential part of his spine, maybe. The part that let him stand up for himself and the people he loved. He remarried when I was 19 to a woman named Denise. She was 33 at the time, recently divorced, with a 15-year-old son named Kyle from her previous relationship. I tried to be welcoming to both of them. I really did. I was still grieving my mother, still adjusting to college life, still figuring out who I was, but I understood that my father was lonely and that he deserved happiness. Denise and I never really clicked, though. She's one of those people who's sweet as pie when my father is watching and something else entirely when he's not. Little comments about my appearance, my career choice, my single status. Nothing overt enough to complain about, but a constant low-level hum of criticism and condescension. I learned to keep my distance, visiting for holidays and the occasional family dinner, but nothing more. Kyle is now 28 years old, and he's been a problem for as long as I've known him. He dropped out of community college twice, different colleges, same result. He can't hold a job for more than a few months before getting fired or quitting in a dramatic fashion. He drinks heavily, sometimes disappearing on benders that last for days. He has a revolving door of girlfriends who all seem to leave him for mysteriously similar reasons involving his temper, his drinking, or his refusal to take responsibility for anything. Denise has always made excuses for him. He's sensitive. He's going through a rough patch. He just needs the right opportunity to show what he's really capable of. My father has fully bought into this narrative over the years. He's always been conflict avoidant, and now he goes along with whatever Denise says to keep the peace. It's easier for him to believe Kyle is a good kid with bad luck than to acknowledge that his stepson is a drunk with no ambition and no accountability. This story really begins about 18 months ago, in March of last year. The first visit. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the clinic. We'd had an emergency surgery on a golden retriever that had been hit by a car. The family was devastated, the surgery was complicated, and we'd done everything we could but still lost him on the table. I was exhausted in that bone-deep way that only people in animal medicine understand. Physically drained, emotionally wrung out, barely keeping my eyes open as I drove the 40 minutes home. It was almost midnight when I pulled up my gravel driveway. My headlights swept across the front of my property, and my stomach dropped. There was a truck parked crookedly in front of my house. Not just any truck. Kyle's beat-up Ford F-150 with a dented fender from some accident he'd never explained and the Salt Life sticker peeling off the back window. He'd never been to my property before. I hadn't even told him the address. I found Kyle passed out on my front porch, sprawled across the welcome mat I'd bought at a craft fair, an empty bottle of Jim Beam next to him. He reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. There was vomit on the edge of the porch. Apparently he'd had the presence of mind to lean over before getting sick, which I suppose was the closest thing to consideration I'd ever seen from him. I tried to wake him, shaking his shoulder, calling his name, even nudging him with my foot. He was completely unresponsive. Not unconscious in a medical emergency way. I've seen enough animals in distress to know the difference. Just blackout drunk in that heavy, immovable way where the body shuts down everything except the bare minimum required to keep breathing. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave him on the porch, it was cold, and despite everything, I didn't want him to die of exposure. I couldn't drag him inside by myself. He's got at least 60 pounds on me. So I called my father. It was nearly 1 in the morning, but I was out of options. Denise answered on the third ring. Her voice was alert, not sleepy, which should have been my first clue that she'd been expecting this call. "Oh, thank goodness he's there," she said, with a relief that felt performative even through the phone. "He and Madison had a huge fight tonight. He was so upset, and he said he needed somewhere quiet to go. I told him your place would be perfect." I felt my jaw drop. "You told him to come here? Without asking me?" "Well, honey, I knew you'd say yes. Your family. And you have all that space out there. It's not like you're using it for anything." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Kyle was not my family, that I had never agreed to be his emergency crash pad, that I had work in 6 hours and a drunk man-child snoring on my porch, that my home was absolutely being used for something. It was being used by me, for my peace and my life. But I was too tired to fight. "This can't happen again," I said firmly. "He needs to leave first thing in the morning." Of course. I'll send your father to pick him up first thing. You're such a sweetheart for helping out." I ended the call without saying goodbye, grabbed a blanket from inside, threw it over Kyle, and went to bed. I barely slept. My father showed up at noon. Noon. Not first thing in the morning, noon. By then, Kyle had already woken up, let himself into my house through the back door I'd foolishly left unlocked, helped himself to my coffee, finished half a loaf of bread, and was watching TV on my couch like he owned the place. He barely acknowledged me when I came out of my bedroom, and he certainly didn't apologize. When my father arrived, he pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I know this is inconvenient, but Denise is really worried about Kyle. He's going through a rough patch. Madison kicked him out, and he doesn't have anywhere else to go. It would mean a lot to her, to both of us, if you could be supportive." "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low. "He showed up drunk in the middle of the night without asking. Without warning. That's not okay." My father got that look he always gets when he's about to disappoint me. That slightly pained expression, like he knows he's failing but can't figure out how to do anything different. "Just this once, sweetheart. Family helps family." I let it go. That was my first mistake. Update 1. The pattern emerges, April, July. Just this once, turned into twice a month. Then weekly. Then sometimes multiple times a week. The pattern was always the same. Kyle would have some crisis, a fight with Madison, they apparently reconciled and broke up repeatedly, getting fired from another job, running out of money, having his electricity shut off, getting kicked out of wherever he was staying, and suddenly he'd appear at my property. Sometimes Denise would give me a heads-up text. Sometimes she wouldn't. Sometimes I'd just come home from work to find his truck in my driveway and Kyle passed out somewhere on my property. I found him asleep in my chicken coop once. I'm not exaggerating. He'd apparently wandered around my property drunk, decided the coop looked comfortable, and passed out among my terrified hens. They didn't lay eggs for 3 days after that. I had to spend hours calming them down, and one of them still gets skittish around strangers. I found him passed out in my garden, having trampled half my tomato plants. 6 months of careful tending, destroyed in one drunken stumble. I found him on my porch so many times that my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, started asking pointed questions. "Is that young man your new roommate?" she asked once, her tone making it clear she didn't approve. "He was urinating in your yard last night. My grandchildren were visiting." Each time, I called my father. Each time, he promised it wouldn't happen again. Each time, Denise made excuses. Kyle was struggling. Kyle needed support. Kyle was getting better, really, you just can't see it because you don't know him like I do. The conversations with my father became increasingly frustrating. He'd show up to collect Kyle, sometimes promptly, sometimes hours late, and instead of apologizing, he'd lecture me about family obligation. "Your mother would have wanted you to help him," he said once, and I nearly lost control. "Don't you dare bring Mom into this," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Mom would have wanted me to have boundaries. Mom would have wanted me to be safe in my own home. Mom would have wanted you to protect me, not guilt me into accepting this. My father looked wounded, which made me feel guilty, which I think was the point. That's how it always worked in our family. My feelings got sacrificed on the altar of keeping the peace. By June, Kyle had started bringing friends. I came home one Friday evening, another long shift, another complicated surgery, to find 3 cars in my driveway and a small party happening on my back patio. There were beer cans everywhere, cigarette butts ground into the deck I'd spent 2 weekends staining, and music blasting loud enough that I could hear it from the road. I walked around the house and found Kyle and 4 other people I'd never seen before sitting on my lawn furniture, drinking, laughing, completely comfortable like they belonged there. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. Kyle barely looked up. "Oh hey. Yeah, we just needed somewhere to hang out. Madison's being a bitch again. Everyone needs to leave. Right now." Kyle rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes at me, on my own property. "Come on, don't be uptight. We're not hurting anything. This is what family does for each other." His friends laughed like it was a joke. I stood my ground. I told them they had 15 minutes to leave or I was calling the police. They left, but not before someone knocked over my grill and left a scorch mark on the deck where hot coals spilled. Nobody apologized. Nobody offered to help clean up. The next day, Denise called to tell me I'd embarrassed Kyle in front of his friends and that I needed to apologize. I hung up on her. Update 2. The neighbors and the escalation, August-October. By late summer, my neighbors were starting to complain regularly, and my reputation in the community was taking a serious hit. Mrs. Patterson, the 72-year-old widow who's lived on her property for 40 years, stopped me at my mailbox one August morning. Her face was tight with discomfort. She clearly didn't want to have this conversation but felt she had no choice. "Honey, I don't want to cause problems between us," she said, "but that young man who's been around, he was urinating in your front yard last night. In plain view of the road. My grandchildren were visiting, and my daughter saw him through the window." She was concerned about the neighborhood. I was mortified. I apologized profusely, promised it wouldn't happen again, and went home feeling sick with shame. This was my home. My sanctuary. And Kyle was turning it into the neighborhood problem house. The Hendersons, who live on the other side of me, a young couple with a toddler, called me at work one day in September. The wife's voice was hesitant, careful. "We don't want to overstep," she said, "but there was a man and a woman screaming at each other in your driveway at 2 in the morning last night. We think he threw something. We heard glass break. We almost called 911, but we wanted to check with you first. Is everything? Are you okay? Are you safe?" The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My neighbors thought I might be in an abusive relationship. They were worried about my safety because of someone I barely knew and definitely didn't want on my property. "It's not what you think," I said, struggling to explain. "That's my stepbrother. He's not supposed to be there. I'm so sorry for the disturbance." The silence on the other end was uncomfortable. I could tell they didn't fully believe me, or didn't understand why I couldn't control who came to my own property. That night, I started documenting everything. I bought a Ring doorbell camera and 2 additional security cameras for the property. I set one up facing the driveway and another covering the back patio. I started a detailed log with dates, times, and descriptions of every incident. I took photos of the damage, the trampled garden, the cigarette burns on my deck, the tire tracks through my lawn where Kyle had driven drunk and missed the driveway entirely. I also started communicating in writing instead of phone calls. Every text message, every email. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted evidence. When Kyle showed up again in late September, I texted my father immediately, "Kyle is here again without permission. This is the 14th time since March. I need you to pick him up within 2 hours, and this needs to stop permanently. I am documenting everything." My father's response came an hour later. "He just needs somewhere to go. You have all that space. It's not a big deal. Don't be so dramatic. Not a big deal. My peace, my property, my reputation with my neighbors, my sense of safety in my own home, not a big deal." I responded, "If this continues, I will be forced to involve law enforcement. I am not making threats. I am informing you of my boundaries." Denise texted me 20 minutes later, "Your father is devastated that you would threaten to call the police on family. Kyle has issues, but he's not a criminal. You're being cruel and vindictive. I always knew you resented me, but I never thought you'd take it out on my son." I didn't respond. I saved the message. Update 3. The property damage and police involvement, November, December. The incident that changed everything happened the week before Thanksgiving. I was at work, middle of the afternoon, routine appointments, nothing unusual, when I got an alert from my Ring camera. Motion detected at the front door. I pulled up the live feed on my phone and watched Kyle's truck pull into my driveway, weaving noticeably even at slow speed. He got out of the driver's seat, clearly intoxicated even on the grainy camera footage. He stumbled toward the house, tried the front door, found it locked. I'd started locking everything religiously, even when I was just stepping outside, and started banging on it with his fist. Then he started yelling. Profanity, mostly, slurred and angry. He called me names I won't repeat. He kicked the door hard enough that I could see the frame shake on camera. He punched the siding, leaving a visible dent. And then he picked up one of the decorative rocks from my landscaping, a nice smooth river rock I'd placed carefully around my flower bed, and threw it through my front window. I watched it happen in real time, my heart pounding, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. The glass shattered. The sound was tinny through the camera speaker, but unmistakable. I called 911 from the back room of the clinic, explaining what I'd witnessed, giving them my address, telling them about the history of unwanted visits. My co-workers were staring at me with concern, but I couldn't focus on anything except the image of my broken window and Kyle, now slumped on the porch again, apparently exhausted by his own rage. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, Kyle had passed out cold, oblivious to the glass everywhere and the cold November air blowing through my shattered window. The deputy reviewed my camera footage, took my statement, looked through my documentation of previous incidents, and arrested Kyle for criminal mischief and public intoxication. He spent the night in county jail. It was, I later learned, his first time in actual custody. My father called me the next morning. For the first time in my entire life, I heard genuine anger in his voice, directed at me. How could you do this to Denise? To our family? Kyle has a record now. A criminal record. This will follow him forever. He'll never be able to get a decent job. His whole life is ruined because you couldn't just let him sleep it off on your porch. I took a breath. Then another. I forced myself to stay calm. Dad, I said, my voice steady even though I wanted to scream. He broke my window. He damaged my property. He's been trespassing for months. Months, despite being told repeatedly that he's not welcome. This isn't about what I did to Kyle. This is about what Kyle has been doing to me. It's just a window, my father said. We'll pay for it. Denise already said she'd cover the cost. There was no reason to involve the police. It's not just a window. It's my peace. It's my safety. It's my neighbors thinking I'm running some kind of flophouse. It's months of my boundaries being ignored. Months of begging you to make this stop. You did nothing. Denise did nothing. So yes, I involved the police. And I would do it again. You're blowing this out of proportion. He's just a kid who's struggling. He's 28 years old, Dad. He's not a kid. He's a grown man who refuses to take responsibility for his actions, and you and Denise have enabled him every step of the way. I took another breath. I'm done. Kyle is not welcome on my property ever again. If he shows up, I will call the police immediately. I will press charges for trespassing. I will pursue a restraining order if necessary. This is not negotiable. My father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. Denise is never going to forgive you for this. I can live with that, I said. And I meant it. Update 4. Building my case and setting legal boundaries, January, April. The holidays that year were non-existent as far as my father's family was concerned. I spent Thanksgiving with friends from work. We had a potluck at my co-worker's house, and it was actually fun. I spent Christmas volunteering at an animal shelter, helping care for the dogs and cats that didn't have homes. It was honestly one of the most peaceful holiday seasons I'd had in years, free from the tension and passive aggression that usually accompanied family gatherings. But I knew this wasn't over. Kyle's charges were eventually reduced to a misdemeanor. His public defender argued first offense, family situation, underlying issues, and he was sentenced to community service plus mandatory alcohol counseling instead of jail time. Denise paid for my window repair, which I documented. She also sent a passive-aggressive card with a check that said, "Hope this covers the damage to your house. Wish we could repair the damage to our family as easily." I kept the card. I kept everything. Evidence of the pattern of behavior, the acknowledgement that damage had occurred, the ongoing refusal to take real responsibility. In January, I consulted with a lawyer. I found her through a recommendation from another vet tech whose sister had dealt with a stalking situation. I explained everything, the months of unwanted visits, the documentation I'd gathered, the camera footage, the text messages, the arrest. She reviewed my materials carefully, asking questions, taking notes. When she looked up, her expression was serious but encouraging. "You have a solid foundation here," she said. "Much better than most people who come to me with these situations. The documentation is excellent. The pattern is clear. You could pursue a restraining order right now, and you'd have a strong case. What would you recommend?" "I'd recommend starting with a formal cease and desist letter. It establishes a clear legal boundary and puts everyone on notice, Kyle, your father, your stepmother, that future violations will result in legal action. If Kyle ignores it and shows up again, the restraining order becomes almost automatic because you've done everything right leading up to it." I had her draft the letter. It was sent certified mail to Kyle at his current address, and copies went to my father and Denise. The letter stated in clear legal language that Kyle was not welcome on my property, that any future presence would be considered criminal trespass, and that I would pursue all available legal remedies including criminal charges and civil suits for any damages. My father called me the day he received it. "A cease and desist letter? From a lawyer? Really? We're family, for God's sake. This is insane. Dad, I've asked nicely. I've asked firmly. I've explained my boundaries dozens of times. I've begged. I've pleaded. Kyle broke my window. He's been trespassing for almost a year. What would you have me do? What else is left? Just talk to Denise. Work this out like adults. I've tried talking. Talking doesn't work because nobody listens. Nobody respects what I say. So now I'm communicating through lawyers. This is what happens when people refuse to respect boundaries. Boundaries become legal documents instead of requests." He didn't have a response to that. March came, and with it, the one-year anniversary of Kyle's first uninvited appearance at my property. I'd been careful, vigilant, consistent. Every time Kyle or Denise or my father tried to push back, I referred them to the cease and desist letter. Every communication was documented. Every boundary was maintained. And then, on a random Tuesday night in late March, Kyle showed up again. It was around 11 p.m. I was already in bed, almost asleep, when my phone buzzed with a ring alert. I pulled up the app and there it was, Kyle's truck, weaving up my driveway. Kyle himself, stumbling toward my porch. I didn't hesitate. I didn't call my father. I didn't try to reason with anyone. I called 911, reported a trespasser in violation of a cease and desist order, and gave them the reference number for the previous incident. Kyle was arrested for criminal trespass. This time, because of the prior arrest and the formal legal warning on file, the charges weren't reduced. The prosecutor took it seriously. The judge took it seriously. Update 5. The fallout and resolution, May, present. Kyle's second arrest had consequences that rippled through my entire family in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Some devastating, some surprisingly healing. First, there were the practical consequences for Kyle himself. Criminal trespass is a more serious charge than criminal mischief, especially when there's documented evidence of a prior warning. His public defender tried to argue extenuating circumstances again, but the prosecutor wasn't having it. Kyle was sentenced to 30 days in county jail, 2 years of probation, and mandatory inpatient alcohol treatment. Denise was absolutely furious. She sent me a letter, not an email or a text, an actual handwritten letter, that was 4 pages of guilt-tripping, accusations, and selective memory. According to her version of events, I had always been cold to Kyle, I had never given him a chance, I was vindictive and cruel and jealous of his relationship with your father. She accused me of abandoning family values, and said my mother would be ashamed of how I turned out. That last part hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. But I also recognized it for what it was, manipulation. A last-ditch attempt to weaponize my grief and my love for my mother against my own well-being. I didn't respond to the letter. I filed it with the rest of my documentation, evidence of continued harassment and emotional abuse. The more interesting consequence, the one I genuinely hadn't expected, was what happened with my father. About 3 weeks after Kyle went to jail, my father called me. His voice sounded different, tired, subdued, somehow smaller than I was used to. "I need to talk to you," he said. "In person. Can I come to your place?" I hesitated, but something in his voice made me agree. He showed up alone, which was unusual. Denise usually accompanied him everywhere, monitoring conversations, shaping narratives. He sat at my kitchen table, and for a few minutes, he just looked around, at the repaired window, at the security cameras visible through the glass, at the home I'd built for myself through years of hard work and determination. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "Several, actually. Maybe more than I can count. I waited, not trusting myself to speak. Denise and I have been having problems. Not just because of what happened with you, though that's a big part of it. She's been hiding things from me. A lot of things. He rubbed his face with both hands, looking older than his 61 years. How much money she's been giving Kyle. Thousands of dollars, over the years. And there have been other incidents. Before he started coming here. What kind of incidents? His previous girlfriend, Madison's predecessor, a woman named Jennifer, she had a restraining order against him. Kyle harassed her for months after they broke up. Showed up at her work, her apartment, her parents' house. Denise paid her off to drop it. Paid her actual money to make it go away so Kyle wouldn't have a record. He looked at me with something like shame. She's been bailing him out his entire adult life, literally and figuratively, and I believed her when she said he was a good kid going through a rough time. I wanted to believe it because believing it was easier than fighting. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to speak without crying or yelling or both. I should have listened to you, my father continued. When you said he was trespassing. When you said you didn't feel safe. When you sent that cease and desist letter. I should have taken your side. You're my daughter, my actual daughter, and I chose my wife's comfort over your safety. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. Your mother would be ashamed of me. Not you. Me. For failing to protect you. For letting my fear of conflict hurt you. That broke something loose in my chest. I cried. He cried. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since my mother's funeral, almost 20 years ago. My father didn't leave Denise immediately. It's never that simple, especially after 13 years of marriage, but he did start going to individual therapy. Something I'd been gently suggesting for years and he'd always resisted. He's beginning to see the patterns now. How he's been avoiding conflict by sacrificing other people's well-being, including mine. How Denise has manipulated situations to her advantage. How Kyle's behavior was enabled and excused at every turn. As for Denise and Kyle, I have no relationship with them and no interest in developing one. Kyle completed his jail time and, last I heard, is living with a cousin in another state. Whether he actually got sober and turned his life around or just moved his problems to a new location, I don't know and honestly don't care. He's not my responsibility. He never was. Denise still thinks I'm the villain of this story. That's fine. She can think whatever she wants as long as she does it far away from my property. My neighbors have settled down. Mrs. Patterson brought me a homemade pie last month and said she was glad things had worked themselves out. The Hendersons wave when they see me now, which is more than they did during the worst of it. And my property, my 2 acres, my mobile home, my garden and my chickens, is peaceful again. I sit on my porch in the evenings and watch the sun set over the tree line, and I don't feel that knot of anxiety in my stomach. I don't dread coming home from work. I don't wonder what I'll find when I pull up my driveway. This place is my sanctuary again. The way it was always supposed to be. What I learned. For anyone in a similar situation, dealing with family members who won't respect your boundaries, your property, or your peace, here's what I wish I'd known from the beginning. Document everything. From the very first incident, keep a detailed log. Dates, times, descriptions, photos, screenshots of texts. You never know when you'll need it, and having evidence transforms a, he said, she said, situation into an undeniable pattern of behavior. Communicate in writing. Phone calls can be denied or misremembered. Text messages and emails create a permanent record. When I switched to written communication, it changed everything about how my family responded to me. Invest in security cameras. My Ring doorbell and security cameras were worth every penny. Having video evidence of the window being broken made my case with law enforcement ironclad. It also gave me peace of mind when I wasn't home. Consult a lawyer early. I wish I'd done this sooner instead of trying to handle everything myself. Understanding my legal options gave me confidence and a clear path forward. Many lawyers offer free initial consultations. Set boundaries clearly and consistently. Every time I let something slide, just this once, it made the next boundary violation more likely. Consistency matters. If you say, never again, and then allow it again, your words lose all meaning. Except that some relationships may not survive. I lost my relationship with my stepmother and stepbrother, such as it was. That was the price of protecting myself. It was worth it. The relationships that were worth saving, like eventually, with my father, survived because they were built on something real. Don't let anyone weaponize guilt. Family helps family, and your mother would be ashamed were both manipulation tactics designed to override my legitimate concerns and safety needs. Recognizing these phrases for what they were helped me stay strong. Your peace is worth protecting. This is your life, your home, your sanctuary. You have every right to defend it, even against family members, even against people who claim to love you. Love without respect isn't love, it's possession. I'm not sure what happens next with my father and Denise. Their marriage seems shaky, and I suspect there's more that will come out as my father continues therapy. Whatever happens, I've made it clear that I'll support my father as a person while maintaining firm boundaries about what behavior I will and won't accept in my life. For the first time in almost 2 years, I feel like myself again. I feel strong. I feel proud of the choices I made, even the hard ones. That's worth everything. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect this to get so much attention. Thank you all for the support and validation. To answer some common questions from the comments. Yes, I still have all the documentation. My lawyer advised me to keep it for at least 7 years in case Kyle violates his probation or tries anything else. It's all backed up in multiple locations. No, I never got reimbursed for the garden damage, the deck damage, or other property damage beyond the window. I decided pursuing that wasn't worth the emotional energy, but I did document everything in case I need it for a future civil suit. For those asking about the chickens, they're doing great. 6 hens, all healthy, all laying regularly now that they're not being terrorized by drunk strangers. Beatrice, my Rhode Island Red who was most traumatized by the coop incident, has fully recovered and is actually the boldest one now. My father and I are working on rebuilding our relationship. It's slow, and there are setbacks, but it feels genuine for the first time in years. We're actually talking, really talking, about things we should have addressed decades ago. And for everyone who suggested I should have handled this differently, been more patient, tried harder to keep the peace, with respect, no. I tried patience for months. I tried keeping the peace. All it got me was more trespassing, more property damage, and more disrespect. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to involve consequences, and sometimes the only consequences that matter are legal ones. Thanks again, everyone. If sharing my story helps even one person protect themselves and their property, it was worth every word.